Right, now I guess just do address us. Over to you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Been a long, you never know. Yeah, only two. I want to talk about the transmission of the written Torah. Let's go back to first principles. Like earliest time, the Chachamim tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated the Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, word by word. Moses wrote it down. Moses, as you know, then wrote 12 copies, and he gave one to each of the tribes. What happened then? Well, presumably, from then onwards, they copied them and passed them on. The Torah was given in two fashions: the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, which is what we have in Yaron HaKodesh, and the oral Torah, which was passed down literally just only from father to son, from teacher to pupil. We can prove actually that there must have been that right from the start there must have been oral. We can actually prove it quite easy. The Torah says, for example, you shall write them upon the doorpost of your house and upon your gate. Doesn't give you the vaguest clue of what to write on, or how to write. You can read in the Torah that we just said. They shall be for you should well you should write they should be for but bind them on the sign upon your hand, they should be for ornaments between your eyes. Well, the Torah doesn't give us a clue what to do or what to write or how to do it. I don't know if you've ever been to the Shrine of the Book. If you have, it's worth looking at some of the little rooms off the main concourse there. There's a pair of tefillin from Bar Kochba caves. I think Yigal Yadin found them. Unbelievable. They look like the tefillin. They're very small, but then I've got a very small pair of tefillin I use for travel. But they look like the tefillin that we put on today, and that's Bar Kochba, and that goes back to what 100 and 130, 120, 130 CE. So that means they must be putting on tefillin like that even earlier, much, much. So we can actually prove the existence of the oral law, which eventually, as you know, was written down by Rabbi Geoffrey. What I want to talk about particularly is the written law. How the written law went from generation was simply by the fact the scribes copied the Torah. Now, those of you who were in the Or Chadash Binyan on Shabbat will know, will have seen, not uncommon, it's for your experience anyway, that a scribe makes a mistake. Now, scribes are very, very, very careful, but they can make a mistake. We found the Sefer Torah on Shabbat. It had the word et in it. It should have said el, right? Um, as I said, the Balkio was too clever, it was too good. It's very interesting. Mistakes, we do find these mistakes. I don't know if any of you remember the late Rabbi Ivor Abrams, going back a very long time. He was the rabbi in Shepherd's Bush, and then actually was the rabbi in Wembley. And he died terribly, terribly young, totally, completely, utterly unexpected. Just went to bed one night and died. He must have been in his maybe 40s. He was a exceedingly nice man. And he told me, and you might find this very difficult to believe, that a bar mitzvah he'd had once in Shepherd's Bush. The boy had been laying his set of kiddush, and you will know it says Hashem Shem Kurachim B'Chanun Erecha Painol Kesed Ve'emet. Right? The boy read Hashem, Hashem, Hashem Keil Rachim B'Chanun. The scribe had written Hashem 3 times. Right? And the interesting thing that applies, of course, to what we saw on Shabbat in our minyan as well. This Sefer Torah we used here, it's not a new Sefer Torah, it's been there probably for years. And unquestionably, it's been used for years. In the same way as Rabbi Ben said to me, that Sefer Torah that the boy had found the extra Shem in had been used for years. We read what we think we expect to find there. So going back to where we were before, scribes passed on from one generation to the next their Sefer Torah. And their Sefer Torah was copied. And not occasionally, an error was actually transmitted from one generation to the next, from one Sefer Torah to the next. And there are well-known errors. Ibn Ezra, for example, knew very well of mistakes. He knew I'm going to say actually mistakes is a difficult word to use. Variant readings in the Sefer Torah. Now, from about the 6th century onwards, people started looking into this very, very carefully. Scholars, great scholars. And schools of Masoretes grew up. What are Masoretes? Word Masor is, you will know it from what's the movement called now? Masorti thing. The Masorti movement. They've taken the word from Masor. What is Masor? Limsor means to hand off. Tradition. Masor usually is understood as to be tradition. The Masoretes were people who examined the texts of the Torah and they tried to stand, in fact, they did. That was Mashim, and all identical. But they standardized exactly what the text should actually be. 2 particular schools developed. Some were in Yerushalayim, but in Tiberias, 2 that became very famous were the schools of Ben Moshe ben Asher, which is in Tiberias, and there's a possibility he was a Canaanite, don't know for sure, and the school of Ben Naphtali. We don't know what his first name was, there are different views. These people made it their business to examine the text and try and come to a conclusion, what should it actually be? Now, I've imagined it. This is just purely my imagination. It's the easiest way to understand what they did. And I don't know if they did exactly this, but they must have done something. They must have taken as many different iterations as they possibly could find and go through them letter by letter. So they would say, what is in your Sefer Torah? Mine says Bereshit, Bet, Reish, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Taf. That's the first word. And somebody else said, next person, yes, I've got that. I've got Bet, Reishin without Bet, Reishin without the Yud in it. Somebody else has got a Sefer Torah with the Yud. So the next one is, and they took the majority. And if it's majority, let's say 150, 200 Sifrei Torah in front of them, and if 98 of them had the word Bereshit with a Yud, and the others didn't, then they say, well, the majority must be the correct way of doing it. I don't know if that's what they did, but they must have done something very similar to that. They also formed the trop, that's the singing notes, which is a fascinating topic, which I'm not going to talk about. And they created them. There were various systems of the singing notes. And they also finalized vowels. Should there be a kamat? Should there be a patach? Should there be a segel? Should there be a tzedek? And sometimes these things make a difference. Then they actually wrote down what they had fixed, and eventually, what do we call codex produced? Now, codex is a book, and the most famous codex is there's an Aleppo codex, um, which comes possibly from the 12th century, no, earlier, 11th, 10th, 11th century, and was kept in Aleppo. And it was written under the direction of Ben Asher. Here is a picture, which I'm going to pass around, of a page of the codex, this codex. There are other codexes. There's the Leningrad Codex, for example. In this, this we believe was done directly under the direction of Ben Asher, and it was written down what all the variants that they found and what they've decided the actual pronunciation of a word should be, and what the trop should be, what the singing note should be on every single word. This has a fascinating history, this Aleppo Codex. It was Aleppo, how it got there. I have a book on the subject, a very popular book. It's not a scholarly book on what actually happened to it, how it traveled around the world, and how different people got it, till eventually it now is in Yerushalayim. Part of it is mythic. That holds virtually the whole of the Torah is, but the rest of the Nach is there. There's one in Leningrad, but which is more complete. But this, if it is believed that the Aleppo Codex is the one that Maimonides actually used. So you can see it's really very. What did they fix? Well, you will know that every time you look in the Torah, from time to time, you will find that in the Chumash, you will find variants. You will find, for example, what's called a Krikativ. Krikativ is where it means it's read one way, a word is read one way, but is written another way. Right? Because they kept the old traditions. They fixed the exact appearance of the text. There are places in the Torah where there are dots on a word. In fact, in Nach, there's even dots under a word somewhere. They fixed where there should be brackets in the Torah. The scribe uses the nun, inverted nunin, and it occurs in other places, not only in the Torah itself, but there are one or two other places in that where you find them. And these were fixed by the Masoretes. They fixed where there should be a large letter or a small letter, and there are a number of places for these variants. The question is why? With the variants, there are lots of questions. One of them is, why do we have all these funny little things in the Torah? The answer is we don't know. I was given a very, very cute answer. And I'm using the word deliberately. It's a very cute answer that I like a lot, and I can't prove it. You know, if you're at a lecture, when you're at school and you take notes, the chances are that when you leave and you come back to your notes, you can read them fine. But somebody else might have a lot of difficulty reading them. You might make little squiggles, I mean, I know that I do, the way I write things. Sometimes the words the or and or something, I don't even write the whole word. And we all do that. And I heard it once suggested that Moshe, as you know, God explained to him each thing as he was going by. And Moshe, in order as an aide memoir, he wrote, for example, a big letter, large letter, or sometimes a little letter. And it would remind him that when he's teaching the Torah, when he would get to that spot, I've got to tell him about that as well. Are you with me? I don't know if there's any truth in it, but it's a really lovely idea. They counted the number of words. They counted the number of verses, the number of letters, the number of paragraphs. They don't always concur with the numbers that the computers find, or the numbers that you could find if you sat and counted yourself. So if you were to count the number of letters in the Seder Bereshit, you might not come to the same number that the Masoretes came to. It's a bit of a problem. And many scholars over many years have tried to understand how they came to one particular number, and yet if you look at it and you count it yourself, you'll find it different. You can't go down that route today. But there are all sorts of interesting questions. Now, you have on your piece of paper at the top the Kazakh, the end of every book, every book of the Chumash, they wrote a summary. I've translated it for you as well. They did it at the end of every single one. So I've just given, this is from Bereshit. They always started with Chazal. Number verse, and it says, Sikum Sefer Bereshit. The number of verses in the book of Bereshit is 1,534. And they gave it the letters Aleph, Chet, Lamed, Aleph, Chet, Lamed, Dalet. And if you count it up, you get to, well, the Aleph stands for 1,000. Obviously, they weren't going to write 1,000. They wrote an Aleph to stand for 1,000. It stands for 1,535. The midpoint of the book, there's a verse, here, by your sword, you should live, in Bereshit 27. It's got 12 parshiot. And how are you going to remember it's got 12 parshiot? Zer, Shemil Olam. Then this is my name. Wherever you remember the word Zer. There are 43 paragraphs. And I won't go through this. You can look at it for yourself. This is a translation of the Sikkim for Sefer Bereshit. Anybody got any questions? I'm going to finish by looking at a Masoretic note from this week's Seder. We have a problem, which is to try and understand why the Torah has all these strange things, particularly Kurikativ, and why words are written one way but have to be read a completely different way. Why there are dots? Why are there big letters and short, small letters? It's a big problem to understand why. I've done a lot of work on it in the last couple of years. I've been through the entire Torah and I've looked at every single Masoretic note. What do I mean by Masoretic note? If you look on the bottom, I've just copied from the Sonsino, and I deliberately did the Sonsino. I find it very comprehensive. If you look at the very, very bottom, you barely read it actually. And you see the first column got a little tiny line at the bottom, and then underneath it, you've got is a Masoretic note. I did this because most of you probably haven't even noticed it's there. If you look on the next column, you've got the same thing. There's also a tiny line with a Masoretic note. These are all the Masoretic notes, and you can find them when you look into a Chumash that's got all these things noted. And it tells you the variations, and it tells you whether something should be read this way or shouldn't be read that way. It points out every Kurikativ. Now, I brought this just an example for you from this week's parasha. The Torah says in verse 29, it's talking about the frogs. The Torah says, on you and on your people and on your servants, the frogs will come up. And if you have a look in verse 29, you can see on the word Uvachai is an asterisk. So that asterisk directs you to a footnote, the Masoretic note at the bottom. If you look down the bottom, it's difficult to see what it says. I'm sorry about that. But it says Yatir Hay, an extra hay. Now, Uvacha is spelled very, very strangely. And anybody who knows about Hebrew will look at it and say, it should be spelled Vav, Vet, Vanuchaf. What's it got a hay there for? Uvacha and on you. So the Masoretic note says to us, yes, it should be like that. It's not wrong. This is correctly spelled. But now we have a big problem, which is why is it spelled like that then? If it's wrong, then it is. What's the difference between Uvacha and Uvacha as it's spelled here with a hand? Well, you never see. You just don't find it. If it was feminine, it would say Uvach. You wouldn't say Uvacha. You wouldn't have a hay on it at all. Your first thought might be, yeah, it's feminine. It's not feminine. It means on you, which is spelled the same way, but pronounced different. So what is this hay doing here? And let me tell you, I've been, as I just said, through every single one of these Masoretic notes in the Torah, and I've tried to explain what every single one is doing there, and many of them are correct. There are one or two books. The most famous is the Minchat Shai, which you find at the end of some Chumachim, who explains the Masorah. But there are many times when he doesn't explain anything. He just notes, as he would do here, that the Masoret said there has to be a hay at the end of this word. He doesn't say why. And you'd be very surprised on many of them that there is no explanation. Here I found an explanation from Balaturim. Balaturim is Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, died in 1340. And he's a very, very, very interesting commentator. He wrote a book called Karpraot La Torah. Karpraot are Vorspeisen. Vorspeisen. What's a Vorspeisen? An hors d'oeuvre. Taste it. An hors d'oeuvre. Hors d'oeuvres to the Torah. Karpraot La Torah. And he's fairly short, very, very short comments actually, but sometimes really right to the point and very, very interesting. He points out, and this is something he does quite often, that the word uvacha, spelled like this, occurs 3 times in the whole of the Tanakh. And so he associates each one of them to explain why it's brought here. So he says the reason is because these 3 places explain what's going on here. The 3 places where it's spelled strangely explain what's going on here. That's why they're all spelled like that. The first place he brings is from Samuel, where King David sings Ki v'cha arut good. For by you I run upon a troop. Doesn't really matter what it means, as you'll see. And then he says the third place is in Psalms, V'cha Chasiti. I've taken refuge in you. So I run up. First of all, it's the frogs, he says. Then I run coming up in troops from the second source. And then I trust in you, I take refuge in you, is the Israelites took refuge in God. So he associates, are you with that? Did you follow that? You don't say yes if you mean no. He associates 3 different places. He says, put them all together and you'll understand better what's going on here. It's spelled uvacha to show you that in those 3 places they're related. The Israelites actually said, the frogs came up, as we had here, I now Cedra. David says, I run upon a troop, so the frogs came up in troops. And then I took refuge in you, it says in Psalms, meaning that the Israelites took refuge in God. That's, he says, is the reason it's spelled like that here. Is it? You tell me. Very briefly, because I think we should stop, shouldn't we? Yes? Very briefly, look at the second one, which is one of my favourite problems. If you look in verse 7, V'saru hatzfardim, the frogs will depart from you, and there is a Masoretic note. What does the Masoretic note say? It's milra. What is milra? The accent, the Masoretic says the accent has to be not V'saru, it has to be V'saru. What's the difference between V'saru and V'saru? What's the difference between havu and havu? You heard me say that one before?
Mm-hmm.
It changes the tense. V'saru, they departed. V'saru, they will depart.
Is on the range.
V'saru. And that's about who fixed the trop? The Masoretes. And the Masoretes are pointing out here, whatever you do, be very careful to put the accent in the right place. Now, this is a Masoretic note. This is not a note from Sonsino. This is not a note from Abraham Cohen, who edited the Sonsino version. It's from the Masoretes themselves. It goes back that far. You can imagine that there is far more to talk about. Far. There are books and books and books. I hope I've just drawn your attention to it. If you didn't know anything about it at all, maybe you know. And I hope it'll encourage you to look even more carefully at the text in the Quran.
Very much. We're looking closely at the lady shovers to see what we can spot. Okay, I'll just say goodbye to those on Zoom, and then we'll finish off the proceedings here.